That was
here,
impressive, by the way.
Yeah.
I was really impressed with it.
Like, I think a lot of us as students, we didn't realize how much actually goes into it, and especially coming from like a tribe that is actually federally recognized already, I didn't realize a lot of the processes that went into it before, and the fight of what you have to do and speak louder. But sorry, were you telling me to speak louder, or were you just? Oh, weird. I thought she was like, I can't hear you. So I was like, sorry. But yeah, so it's really interesting to have this conference and that you're all here to support. So thank you. So we have Adam, and he's come a long way, and we're Alan. Sorry, Alan. I'd read this thing, but we have Alan. So just have him go ahead and tell you all about what he does and see if he can help us and all that we need to know and learn. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I guess I have to talk from down here. Okay, hi, I'm Alan Leventhal. I'm a staff member at the San Jose State University. I grew up in a small town in the Deep South. Some of you may have heard of it, New York City, where they make paste pecani sauce. And I ended up working in Nevada. I worked with folks from the Washoe, Shoshone, and Paiute tribes in the 70s. And I came to San Jose State University in 1978. By this time, I had taught about North American Indians at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, the University of Nevada. When it came to California, the literature was very meager in terms of contemporary populations of people. 78, the Handbook of California, or Handbook of North American Indians, Volume 8, California came out, and that was kind of the first attempt since Kroeber's tome of 1925. 1980, there was a woman walking on campus, escorted by two students who knew about my work with folks in Nevada, and they introduced me to her, and she said she was an Ohlone Indian. And I said, I never heard of your tribe. And so we went to the library, and we did the little index, C. Ohlone, C. Costanoan, C. Ohlone. And we pulled out Kroeber's 1925 Bureau of American Ethnology study, and principally what was stated was the Costanoan group is extinct for all practical purposes are concerned. So being an intelligent anthropologist, I looked at her and I said, you must be some other tribe. Because I mean, Kroeber being the quintessential authority on California Indians, and she put her hands on her hips and she said, I beg to differ with you and Dr. Kroeber, that my mother is an Ohlone Indian. She was baptized at Mission San Jose and born on the Sonoma Rancheria. And I said, And I said, what do you want us to do? And she said, I want you to help working with the families to go back as far as we can on the genealogy and other information on the tribe. This was 1980. In 1978, as was stated, it's a little 1978, the Federal Acknowledgement Project emerged out of the Interior Department. I had never heard of this until the late 1980s. I met Ron Good and I met Lalo, and they put together an organization in the around the late 80s called the was it Association of Unacknowledged Aboriginal Tribes of California. And so we tried to form strategies about how we can move processes together for unacknowledged tribes. We met with people such as Lynn Aoki, who's still in the Senate. She's working with Senator Akaka's. He's the chairman of the Senate Committee of Indian Affairs. She was then with Senator Inouye, and also Tad Johnson, who was with George Miller, Congressman Miller out of California, about putting together legislation. We had meetings. We even held hearings at San Jose State University and elsewhere. And we formulated with them a bill called HR 2144, which was a federal recognition bill. The Bush administration, Papa Bush, decided to hijack the bill and transform it into a study. And the study was to create the Advisory Council on California Indian Policy, take $800,000, study the California Indians' needs, and then submit those recommendations to Congress. The interesting thing is the economy was tanking, and the Bush administration had were not compelled to honor, even if the legislation passed, which it did. And surprisingly, Bill Clinton was elected. It took Clinton around 2 years for his people to get control of the interior. So by 1994, elections were being held. And I had asked the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Sacramento for a map showing the jurisdictions, the Bureau's jurisdictions over the tribes in California, because they're sub-agencies as well. And they said no map existed. So for the Congressional Act, I and a few others created a map to divide up California into seven districts. The districts essentially represented historical, cultural, regional, kind of had some sense to it, even though it was fictitious. But the reason for that was that there were to be 7 representatives elected to represent unrecognized tribes, 7 representatives elected to represent recognized tribes, and 2 representatives from terminated tribes. So the universe at that period of time consisted of 3 classified types of tribes: unrecognized, recognized, and terminated. Interesting enough, as this is happening, we start getting information about it's 25 CFR 83, Part 83, the 7 criteria. Okay. In 1994, there was changes going on, but I want to just go back to 1992. Bud Shepard, if anybody heard of him, he was one of the architects of the criteria. He gave testimony to Congress stipulating that they don't work. They are fatally flawed. Tribes will never get through these processes because they were constructed so that tribes would fail. And of course, an alert Congress is listening and really eager to correct these issues. Okay. The interesting other one was in 1994 under the Clinton administration. Several things happened. One was H.R. 4180, which was a bill, a technical corrections bill, which had 3 kind of sections. The first one was to recognize through Congressional Act Tlingit and Haida of southern Alaska. These are tribes that historically had services, were federally recognized, but were no longer recognized by the United States government, and that bill restored their recognized status. The second one was to speak to Paskenta up in Sacramento Valley to restore their status. The third one was a stipulation that the Secretary of the Interior, nor any of the Secretary's agents, has the authority to terminate a tribe, withhold services from that tribe, and only Congress has the authority to terminate a tribe. Very clear. In 1994, they also passed, even though this is listed here, 25 CFR 83.8, previous unambiguous federal recognition. So that was important. So as we're working with ACCIP, the Advisory Council of California Indian Policy, we are called back to Washington because the Muwekmas asked for a determination of previous unambiguous federal recognition. One of the anthropologists there is Holly Record, who's one of those people who believes that California Indians are not Indians, they are just Mexicans pretending to be Indians. We went back, she called the tribe to come back, well, I can't remember, 8 of us went back to Washington, D.C. Rosemary asked for the letter. Holly says, I don't have a letter for you. So they went to see Ada Deer's aide. She was then Assistant Secretary. She's Menominee. And said, why were we called back? We asked for a letter of determination, previous recognition. When we got back from our lunch, Holly Record could not sit down. Pardon the expression, her ass was smoking. She was hopping mad. And she said to the leadership of Muwekma, you want a letter? You want a letter of federal previous recognition? I'll give you a letter, but you're not going to like what it says. Thus begins the delicate, warm relationship between the Muwekmas and the Interior staff. This was November. When we were there in November, we had turned over, and I have to make an acknowledgement here, a brilliant Native American scholar, legal scholar, Al Logan Slagle, systematically laid out much of the baseline legal history for California. He has since passed away, and his passing is one of the greatest tragedies. Of course, other people who are equally great in the Native communities have passed also, but in this case. And so my work was basically building upon his efforts. And of course, you know what happens when you pass away, you almost become invisible. But I didn't want him to become invisible. So we took archives that he found in the Record Group 75, the Roseburg files, and he had copied and got certified copies of. The Roseburg files was Californian, I think 1909 on. And we showed it to George Roth, another anthropologist working in Interior. And Roth is thumbing through around 100 pages, and he says, wow, where did this come from? And it's, well, Record Group 75. And so he said, do you have more of this documentation? We said, yes. Now, I need to backstep another little bit here. Prior to this period of time, the Interior Department, having professional historians and anthropologists, would help write legal ethnologies, legal historical narratives as part of their professional capabilities for tribes. That's why the burden was much less. Come the Bush years, they said the Interior Department would no longer do any research on behalf of tribes. Okay. So, in 1995, we get a letter. And the letter was from Holly Record and George Roth saying, can you, Muwekma, turn over the universe of policies, BIA policies from 1900 to 1934, in order for us to proceed? We will not look at any of the California petition. And we will draft up a report, and that report will benefit the California tribes through the ACCIP. This is completely outside the regulations. So by March, we submitted what was called, it was Exhibit F. And Al Logan Slagle put in his volume called Unfinished Justice. In May 24th, 1996, two tribes received a determination of previous unambiguous federal recognition. One was Sonungwe Council, which is the South Fork Hoopa tribe, and the other one's Muwekma. So previous unambiguous federal recognition was issued to the tribe. Prior to that, as you heard, Ohlone was restored administratively as a historic tribe by Ada Deer. Muwekma said, if we have previous unambiguous federal recognition, how were we legally terminated? And when we used the word terminated, they said, no, you were never terminated. The Bureau decided we don't want to deal with you anymore. And we asked, how is that a legal process? They said, we'll get back to you. They did the same to Samish. Samish had a sue up in Washington State. They were fighting tooth and nail with Scott Keeph. They sued, an administrative judge remanded them to be restored because they couldn't get a square deal from these professionals working for BAR. BAR was then the branch of acknowledgement and research, which is now called OFA. Some people call it OFO. But, okay. So, what had happened in 1996 to 1998, we had submitted in 6 linear feet of documentation. We put in like I said, 6 linear feet. We only had to demonstrate since 1900. They agreed that the tribe was federally recognized at least from 1914 to 1927, which I'll show you on some slides in a minute. In 1998, they were placed on ready status because they were told the only way you can become federally recognized, even if you're previously recognized and never terminated, was through the 25 CFR process. Muwekma consistently wrote and asked to be treated like I own in 1994, that the Assistant Secretary has the authority to restore the tribe, which falls under this, by the way, 25 CFR 1.2, which means that the Assistant Secretary, the Secretary has the authority to waive the regulations if it is to benefit a tribe. They said this doesn't exist. That the Assistant Secretary has no authority. This is Scott Keeph and his buddies saying that Assistant Secretary has no authority to restore a tribe. So in 1994, I own, and then as we mentioned, at the end of the Clinton administration in 2000, Kevin Gover restored actually 3 tribes. 2 Alaskan tribes and Lower Lake Khoi. Lower Lake, by the way, was also named in legislation with the Muwekma in 2000 for proposed restoration or reaffirmation. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take you through my summer vacation here, which is since 1980. I want to point out that in the process, that when a tribe submits in their petition, it goes from the tribe to now the Office of Federal Acknowledgement. Under the Muwekmas, when they submitted, the Baby Bush administration came in, and Neil McCaleb, pardon me, was nominated Assistant Secretary. His specialty in Indian affairs was architecture. He had no background in Indian affairs. And he says, what do you expect? I'm a hack. I have no background in Indian affairs, so I will rely and rubber stamp anything these dudes say. Office of Federal Acknowledgement. Lee Fleming became the branch chief. Scott Keeph was the major solicitor. So the tribe has no way to cross-examine the determinations made by the Office of Federal Acknowledgement, and they have no access to the decision maker. In fact, the first time a decision maker, the Assistant Secretary, ever had a chance to look at the Muwekma petition materials was last year when Larry Echo Hawk, we met with him in the Interior Department, and he was astonished that he says, it's all this stuff in your petition? And we said, yes, and more. And we'll show you what some of that is. Okay, so with that, you're going to lower the screen. So this is a case study. And you'll have to excuse me because it's going to be a little bit of history of California, then narrowed down to more of the mission period, because a lot of tribes did not really were involved in the mission, especially the northern tribes and interior tribes. And then it will focus down into the Monterey, San Francisco Bay, and then into the San Francisco Bay area. So this is some of the evidence that we presented. This was put together with the leadership of the Muwekma tribe, sampling of evidence, and of course how you spell American Indian in Washington, D.C.'s is Code of Federal Regulations. Okay, so you've already heard about the 7 mandatory criteria. The petitioner has been identified as an American Indian entity on a substantially continuous basis since 1900. And evidence that the group's character as an Indian entity has from time to time been denied, has been denied, shall not be considered to be conclusive evidence that this criterion has not been met. I don't want to read it to you, but anyway, they tell you can use newspapers, anthropologists, historians, and other scholars dealing with the county, parish, local government, relationship with state governments, which I find very interesting. They slammed Schaghticoke because the argument was that they used too much state evidence. And there's no way to say you can't use too much state evidence. And, okay. So B, a predominant portion of the petitioner groups comprises a distinct community and has existed as a community from historical times into the present. And there's a lot of kind of interweaving of possibilities. And this will be made available, and it's online. C, the petitioner has maintained political influence or authority over its members as an autonomous entity. This also deals with things such as informal leaders. Leaders do not have to be elected. Leaders can be acknowledged by heads of households that make critical decisions, that foster children. Now, I had 10 cups of coffee, so if I go too fast. A copy of the group's present governing document, including its membership criteria in the absence of written document for petitioner, must provide a statement describing in full its membership criteria and blah, blah, blah. Okay, the government. E is one of the most critical criteria. It's really, the petitioner's membership consists of individuals who are descended from a historic Indian tribe, from historic Indian tribes that combine and function as a single autonomous political entity. This is like around the missions. And other areas too, other communities as well. Church and schools, affidavits, and anyway, so this becomes an important, and if you have any questions, yell out. F, the membership of the petitioning group is comprised principally of persons who are not members of any other acknowledged North American Indian tribe, meaning that you're not enrolled in any other tribe, and that neither the petitioner or its members are subject of congressional legislation that has expressly terminated or forbidden the federal relationship. This goes to speak to the woman of North Carolina. Okay, our buddy, Kroeber. Now, Kroeber was a product of his time. He was not an evil man, but he was not very sympathetic either. He was trained as an anthropologist. He was not an evolutionist. He didn't care that Indian cultures changed through time. He wanted the pure stuff before contamination by either Americans, by Spanish, by the Catholic Church, or anything else. And he wrote the Ohlone group is extinct so far as all practical purposes are concerned. Even though he acknowledged some individuals were around, essentially we demonstrated how scholars in anthropology, history, and archaeologists goose-step behind his statement of extinction. And this would reach a head in 1989 when Frank Norick, who is the principal curator of the Phoebe Apperson Hearst Museum at Berkeley, would go to the newspapers. And the key thing here is that he says, we do not know who the East Bay Indians were. The few Indians that happened to survive were swallowed up and exterminated by civilization by the latter part of the half century. Right. And the reason why he was doing this is that the Muwekmas before NAGPRA claimed 550 burials from Stanford at the time of the end. And Stanford agreed, acquiesced to return the burials. He went ballistic. So he said, who are you going to believe, Bay Area? Me with a PhD, an anthropologist, or these fake people claiming to be Ohlone Indians? This is one of many. But I like this one in particular. So as you know, California is one of the most complex areas of the world. People have tried, linguistically, people have tried to put together, you know, kind of linguistic boundaries. So don't always believe what you see, but generally, at the time of Spanish contact, the area of Costanoan is pretty much represented, approximately, and you can find your tribe in there as well. In fact, I don't see, there's the Tubado right there. Just wanted to put it, just that she put her stuff up on the board. Okay, so flying over a clear day in San Francisco Bay, you can see that the bay was a clear, when they were holding my heels out, taking pictures. But it was a very rich environment. The land of the Elonese, these were painted for Mission Dolores in 1816 by tourists that although they were baptized, they were still allowed to don on regalia and entertain the distinguished European guests. Randy Milliken did a wonderful job in trying to reconstruct the major tribal village groups that surrounded the San Francisco Bay. And we can pull back Muwekma to a variety of these villages. We have actually nailed down the village through the mission records. One of the good things the missions did do. And of course we know the world would change when this handsome dude, who was the Duke of Naples, was named King of Spain. And Charles III, in the House of Bourbon, because he drank, ordered the pobladores in 1769 to come into Alta California, into your ancestral homeland, in order to prevent the Russians, the English, and there was rumblings on the East Coast at that time period as well. So we know that the explorations of the Portola or Portola and Father Juan Crespi and later on the famous Anza expeditions in order for them to establish their presence. They encountered tribal groups. There's rich descriptions about them. The East Bay people, one of the earliest missions was Mission Dolores, San Francisco. So both the people of the Peninsula and East Bay went in there. And after being there, you notice how happy they are. Life expectancy in missions range. Obviously some people did survive, but I read some accounts of 2 to 4 years. And if you were born at the mission, your child would be dead within a year. So the mortality rate, they became vectors of various diseases. And again, they were allowed to entertain distinguished visiting Europeans. Mission Santa Clara, as you can see, this is an old photo I took, with 1777 in the Santa Clara Valley. And Mission San Jose was established very close by to Mission Santa Clara and Pueblo de San Jose. They couldn't go up to Oakland. You know why they couldn't go up to Oakland? Because the Indians up there had enough of the mission from Mission Dolores. They threatened to kill the priests and the Indians building this mission. They couldn't go further up the East Bay. The Seclan, the Halkin, and others were threatening to destroy this mission. These are the dudes. Just 2 of them. Pretty tough dudes. Okay. So also Langsdorff and Mission San Jose. So we get some of the symbolism. And in Santa Clara, the priests use some of the Indian names, the place names, but our Rancheria Mother Santa Clara is at the airport. And they knew they were going to build an airport there, so they moved the mission to other times. But they named them after various saints, as Spaniards will do. And of course, when Indians ran away, they were rounded up by military expeditions. 1834, with the edicts coming out of Mexico to secularize, 1834, 1836, several of the Clareños, the Indians from Mission Santa Clara, actually obtained land grants from the governors. And here's Mountain View, Moffett Field military base, in the Inigo Reservation. It was not really a reservation, it was literally a land grant. And essentially he lost it to American squatters. And other ones up here, Ulistac. This is Los Altos Hills, not far from Stamford. Pretty prestigious areas, and the Rancho of the Pigs, Roberto Ballamino. The world would change again when this handsome dude. No, it's not Russell Crowe. It's Charles Fremont, but John Fremont. Anyway, his father-in-law, Senator Benton, sent him to seize California, and we know about the Bear Flag Rebellion. Hostilities broke out, and he's the last of the governors, Governor Pio Pico. He was part African, part Native American, and part Spanish. He signs the end of the hostilities, and then more formalities occur between Mexico and the United States, and this is the area ceded by Mexico in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which guaranteed the rights of Native Californians and Californios, at least in California. Then, of course, the famous 49ers, not the football team, but some people estimate up to 300,000 non-Indian men come flocking in through the Golden Gate, and, you know, rushes on. and they watered down the Sierra. They prevented tribes from burning the land management, hunting on their lands, and we really have very detailed documentaries about the impacts and really the genocide, to use Kayleen's term, which she's not wrong at all, of California Indians. California becomes a state in 1850, which is very interesting. Warfare is going on, and it's between the argument is who's going to pay for it, the feds or California state. So part of the issue is what do we do with the still around 350,000? There is some estimates now that revise California's population between 1 million to 1.5 million Indians in 1769. By 1900, there are around 20,000 or less Indians left. It is devastating. So even the word genocide may even be too soft a term. So Millard Fillmore, who's famous from the Fillmore West and the Fillmore East, he and Congress allocate $100,000 in 1851, 1852 to treat with the California Indians. So the three commissioners come out, McKee, Barbara, and I can't remember Steve Wozniak, that's who it was. Anyway, the point though is that they decide, because California is such a humongous state, to divide the state up into 18 districts and have them quit claim ownership, quit claim their title. This is the only way the federal government can take land from native peoples, even if it's by force, is through treaty. So around 122 tribal groups signed up and down the state. This is considered desert, and of course you have the upper areas of the Sierra. So the treaties went back to Washington, D.C. The newly elected representatives from the Senate argued that Indians should get nothing, and the treaties were submerged into secrecy in the Senate archive. Our buddy here, who has schools named after him, he, in his speech, said a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct. Must be expected. I think Kayleen would disagree with him. While this warfare is going on, at Mission San Jose, Mission Santa Clara, the Muwekmas are being baptized. And not only are they being baptized, they are still, like Ambrosia is listed as an Indian, and this is Rosemary's great-grandmother, Avelina Carnates. Parents was Maria and Pamphilio Yaquilamne, and they're listed as Indios, Indians. As the world is collapsing, there is a religious revitalization movement happening in Nevada that spreads throughout California, through the South, coming up from the South, and all the way up to Oregon, coming back as the roundhouse dances, the Bully Maru. This is a world renewal ceremony, revitalizing languages, religion, and building Christian beliefs. This is Benton, who's Pomo. It's a good photo. But it ends up at Pleasanton. So when the anthropologists from Berkeley interviewed the elders amongst the Sierra Miwok, the Maidu, and the Coast Miwok, they asked, where did the dancers come from? Where did the teachers come from? And they pointed back to Pleasanton. We even know their names. They said Mission San Jose. The Coast Miwok said, we had to buy the dances. We had to buy the regalia from the Caicos people at Mission San Jose. But the anthropologists didn't quite know what to do with it because Kroeber just thought they were kind of extinct. Kuksu was revitalized, which was widespread. High lineage regalia. This is from Craig Bates's wonderful book on power of feather regalia. This is actually from the Sacramento area of 1847. These are up in St. Petersburg. We believe that these ancient pendants, going back to around 900 AD in the Muwekma territory, represent the big heads. The big head dancers. This is 1917, again from Craig Bates and Kuksu. So there was a religious revitalization movement. And as our gentleman said earlier, in 1890, 1891, as a result of the 1890 ghost dance, there was like the Indian Offenses Act, which essentially outlaws Indian religion, and much of the regalia could be confiscated and destroyed. they revitalized roundhouses. The last of the roundhouses were up at Pleasanton around 1897. Tupentak is what a roundhouse is in the Chochenyo Ohlone language. Phoebe Apperson Hearst, mommy of William Randolph, did not like living in San Francisco, so she moved to Pleasanton and bought the rancheria belonging to the Californios Augustine Bernal, and she built a Hacienda de Pozo de Verona. Now remember, Norick represented the Phoebe Apperson Hearst Museum at Berkeley. She was the dowager. She was a rival of Stanford. She funded the anthropology department at Berkeley and invited Kroeber to come down and interview the upwards to 125 Indians living in the 1880s there. Some of the families that we know about, Indian women also had to formulate strategies of survival. So Susanna Nichols married a white man named Charles Nichols, and four of her kids here are at school in Niles, another rancheria, in 1891. It's nice having the photo of the kids. The little yellow arrows show Frank, Charles, Flora, and Joe Nichols, all the boys. And here in Berkeley, in 1895, was the poll tax, and notice who was exempt. Remember, we're getting ready for elections. Paupers, insane persons, and Indians. Now, we all know that Indians should be classified along with insane people because they were viewed as incompetents. Yes, insane persons. This is from Berkeley. Right. Not the university. So Norick decides to say he'd be willing to bet, his methodology is a PhD anthropologist, I'd be willing to bet they could not even give you a semblance of a lineage account that was Aboriginal. Again, who are you going to believe? A PhD anthropologist from one of the most prestigious schools in the United States, or these women of color claiming to be California Indians, Ohlone Indians? So, when we dealt with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, we submitted in evidence, starting with the 1900 Indian population census. Not all the Muwekmas were listed here. This is in Niles, Washington Township, Niles, by the Niles Rancheria. But in order to be listed on an Indian census, you had to be what? Ah, Indian. Yes. And then for Pleasanton was a smaller because most of the Indians lived on the adjacent ranches, the hop fields and stuff like that. And I just wanted to point out one person or two people. Ursula Carlins is Angela Colos. We'll meet her later. And her son, a grandson, is Joe Carcisi. His name is Joe Garcia. So the non-Indian person doing the census had a very bad ear for listening to both Spanish and Indian pronunciations. But at least they're there. Not all of the tribe are listed on these two censuses. Interesting enough, the criteria says you have to use, back to 1900, the Bureau would not look at this census. I'll tell you why in a minute. So these are the houses that they lived in. They're called little casitas, and then Charles Kelsey, some of you might know, lived on 12th Street in San Jose. They should make a monument to this guy. He was secretary of the Northern California Indian Association. This was published by Heiser through Berkeley in, I think, 74. And they produced a schedule showing where all the landless and homeless Indians were. 1904, and it was presented and incorporated in the 58th Congress. It was written to President Roosevelt. While Kelsey is back in D.C. working with a Senate clerk, they wanted to see about anything about California Indians, and they find these documents that have a seal of secrecy. So Congress votes to remove, the Senate does, to remove the seal, and lo and behold, what do they find? And it wasn't a box full of chocolates. It was the 18 unratified treaties. And they said, we have a problem. The problem is that these treaties were negotiated for California Indians to quit claim their ownership of California. They were never ratified. They never gave up their ownership. But Native Californians had another problem. They were not U.S. citizens. They were equivalent of the same people. Right? So Congress moves to name Charles Kelsey Special Indian Agent for Northern California. Northern California is from the Los Angeles border to Oregon. Picture yourself, 1905. You are now named a special agent. There are no superhighways. You don't have a Ferrari. You have horse and buggy, horseback, and you've got to now track down all these Indian bands and others that you listed in 1904 to be placed under your jurisdiction. So this gal, Elena, Rosemary's great-grandmother, she was baptized in 1864. She died. Mission San Jose. She's buried at the Ohlone Indian Cemetery in 1904. Okay? She dies in 1904, October. Kelsey, this is the Roseburg files. Okay? 1909. This is the original manuscript of Kelsey. And we always thought that Heiser or others from Berkeley went back and found the Roseburg files. No, they were never touched. Al Logan Slagle looks like he was principally the first scholar to ever get these Roseburg files. Kelsey gave Kroeber a duplicate copy of his special Indian census that Heiser would publish as a kind of a, as a professional courtesy. So Kelsey makes, and not everybody's listed here, 1905, 1906, but the important thing is that Avelina died in 1904, okay? So while he's in the San Francisco Monterey Bay area, he's called back to Washington, D.C., and he does a partial census of Pleasanton and Niles, and there we see Angela Colos and grandson. I just want to point that out. The Marines, they were called, this is Mandy's relations, it would be her great-great-great-grandmother. Anyway, they were not residing on these two rancheries at the time. We find that when some of the Indians listed there died, on their death records, he's listed as Indian. Mission San Jose is where he's buried. Now remember, Norick said, I'd be willing to bet they could not show you a semblance of a lineage account that was Aboriginal. So Kelsey comes out, actually this is his second map from 1913, but essentially he is charged from Los Angeles to Oregon to find all of these bands. Living at Pleasanton are Paula and Maria Reyes, George Santos and Pellegrina Pinos, on Niles, and again some of the kids die in Niles. They're buried at the Indian Cemetery, Mission San Jose. They're listed as Indians. Again, a week later, the other baby dies, living in Niles. At Mission San Jose, Lawrence Nichols, he's baptized as an Indian at Mission San Jose. Church records. And then we submitted this. I got to stop here. In 1989, the tribe submitted in their documents, 6 linear feet, put on ready status. The tribe is sitting there with the only determination of previous unambiguous federal recognition, and we calculated, based upon the Bureau's movement of petitions, upwards to 24 years before they could look at the tribe's documents. So what do? They sued. And the same 5 people, Scott Keeph, Holly Record, John Dibron, the historian from Stanford, the same 5 people fought against the tribe in the federal court and lost. And when the court remanded it for an expedited determination, were the same 5 people to receive the documents, and they said, we never lose. There is nothing you can submit that we will accept. This is called an impartial process. This is the realities through the looking glass. I was naive. I thought, an anthropologist, fairly prestigious university, San Jose State, maybe not as prestigious as this one. We could help lend voice, but it was through the looking glass. Everything was going to be wrong. So during the court case, they asked a legitimate question. The question was, demonstrate how, one more time, previous recognition, how is the current membership, and there was around 500 enrolled, descended from the previously recognized tribe? Well, there was no formal tribal list, so you need to create a tribal proxy. You have to use documents to show who was alive with census records. And because Kelsey was involved beginning in 1905, they originally kind of hinted you couldn't use the 1900 census. and you couldn't use the census from the California Indian Jurisdictional Act from 1928 to 32. Because they said the tribe was dropped from the list of recognized tribes in 1927. So they also wanted it in the technical assistance letter. Quote, "We are concerned that there are members enrolled in your tribe who are members of Mission San Jose, but not members of the historic, previously recognized tribe." Okay? So we knew who they were talking about. They were talking about the descendants of Evelina Marine, because she died in 1904. And so as we were responding to this, which we did a genealogy for every single person in the tribe, 500, we submitted in the 1900 Indian population census, which they never saw. On it was Mercedes Marine, the daughter, middle daughter of Evelina, her son Albert Marine, who was a year and a half, Mercedes' older brother, Dario Marine, who is actually relations of Mandy, and Dario's wife, Catherine Peralta, who he's married to, and his daughter. But the Marines were listed. John Dibron, from Stanford, said, this is not proof that they were members of the community, that they were just probably visiting that day. Normally, the Bureau would get away with this because there's no way to challenge anything they determine. But this was under court order. And the judge, Ricardo Urbina, back in Washington, D.C., already slammed Interior about being disingenuous. That means full of shit. Okay. Anyway, so I'm sorry about that. So this is the baby, who's 1.5. This is his uncle, Dario Marine. This is the houses they lived in until Western Pacific Railroad or Union Pacific Railroad burnt down the houses in 1916. So Kelsey's hand-drawn map showed Indian rancherias. Up here was Verona 30, Mission San Jose. For the Amuh Mutsun, it was Hollister 40. And for the people down in Monterey, it was Monterey 50. They became known as the Verona Band of Alameda County. The Amuh Mutsun became known as the San Juan Batista Band of San Benito County. And the folks down in Monterey were called the Monterey Band of Monterey County. Under the jurisdiction. So by 1913, there was allocations in 1906, 1908 for the Homeless Indian Act to start purchasing land for homeless Indians. Kelsey is at it from 1905 or 1906 to 1913 when he retires. He is $18,000 in debt out of his own pocket in trying to help California Indians. He was a good dude. Before Kelsey retired, Congressman Raker, seems to be an also good guy, asked in formal, now this is from the Roseburg files, which by the way disappeared for a while. I don't know if they've been brought back, but Scott Keeph seems to have removed them. He wanted to know about the Indians of California, their treaty regulations, reports made on the conditions, statement of what has been furnished to the various tribes of California. Sorry if I'm going too fast. This is the various tribal groups that signed the various treaties. That was the Muwekma territory, and they were going to be moved to the interior as party of M and E. He asked if the said 18 treaties were never ratified, no substantive treaties agreements were made. Said tribes state what stops and measures have been taken to extinguish the rights of the said tribes to the lands described in the unratified treaties. So Kelsey, in his formal capacity, responds. None of the treaties mentioned in the Senate document were ever ratified. The government took everything ceded in the treaties and more. For example, the reservations and paid nothing. Absolutely no steps or measures had been taken to extinguish the rights of the tribes to the lands described in the treaties, unratified in any way, shape, or form. I'm not making this up. The said tribes were more properly bands of Indians, are all nearly in existence today, but in reduced numbers. And I love this one in his closing. The Indian office did not even have a record of the 18 treaties until we dug them out of the secret archives of the Senate. Special Indian agent for California. So here again, here is Alameda County, 30. Kelsey steps down. Asbury, Charles Asbury from Reno becomes Special Indian Agent. He's got to pick up. He also has Reno to deal with, his agency. And the reason why these guys are highlighted, here is Ione, there is Lower Lake, there is Verona. They're all set up for land purchase. The reason why I'm showing this is that the argument we made is that with Ione being restored, reaffirmed through the Assistant Secretary, Ada Deer in 1994, Lower Lake being restored by Kevin Godover in 2000, we argued that Verona, Muwekma, which they agree, Muwekma, Verona are the same, were similarly situated. They were equally listed as stakeholders under the jurisdiction of the federal government for purposes, so it's a federal action. So while everybody is waiting for land acquisition, at least 6 of the Muwekma men serve overseas in World War I. Golden Gate National Parks, our buddies up there, will not acknowledge that they're even buried at the Golden Gate National Cemetery. They served in the Marine Corps, they served in the Army, and they served in the Navy. And the earliest one enlists in 1914. America doesn't enter war, I believe, in October of 1917. I could be wrong. Anyway, so Muwekmas are still dying. 1921, listed as Indian, buried at Ohlone Cemetery in Irvington. And then we know that the 1923, the Indians who have no land in California, their jurisdiction is under the, we got the annual report from Jenkins, and he lists several of the tribes. San Benito, those are the Amuh. Monterey, those are the Esalen. And the Salinan tribes from San Miguel and San Antonio. Alameda, Verona, 30. They're all listed of having no land whatsoever. 1924, under Calvin Coolidge, Indians become citizens. Aha! And California Indians know about the unratified treaties. So various groups and lawyers get together and they plan to sue, or they start suing, the United States government. Again, Indians are dying. Martin Guzman, he's the last one we can find that's buried at Mission San Jose at the Ohlone Cemetery. Kroeber, 1925, publishes The Coast-Known Group is Extinct. And Lafayette Dorington. This was a great one that Al Logan Slagle pulled out. Dorington, it appears, was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. He was a prison warden in the Philippines. He incarcerated the Filipino leadership during the Spanish-American War. He was a drunk. So what do you do with drunks? You elevate them. What do you do with incompetents? You put them in position as political hacks. So he was named, by 1923, he is named superintendent at Sacramento. And he receives a series of directives to list by county all of the tribes and bands under his jurisdiction who have yet to receive land so Congress can plan for allocations in 1929, not a good year. And he says there's one band in Alameda County, commonly known as the Verona Band, which consists of about 30 individuals located near the town of Verona. He was supposed to make on-site visits. He never visited anybody. In 1926, he was one of the earliest advocates for terminating the California tribes, the recognized tribes. So we know there's no such place as the town of Verona. There's never been. And then he says, it does not appear at the present time there's need for the purchase of land to establish their homes. He would then proceed to go county by county, and he ended up, and we'll use the word terminate with a small t as opposed to the formal, 135 tribal bands and from on the radar screen as federally recognized tribes. This is what we presented to Office of Federal Acknowledgement, to George Roth. And he wrote up his paper, the draft paper on federal acknowledgement, when we asked for a copy that was promised, John Dibran said no copy exists. It took Rachel Joseph to rankle a copy at the end of 1996 from Interior. But we got it. So this is supposedly the last point of federal recognition. Independently, from 1921 to 1930, this brilliant linguist is interviewing the elders of the tribes. One is Jose Guzman, the other one is Maria de Los Angeles Colas, the woman I showed you on the census. She dies in 1929. He also interviews amongst the Amuh, Exención Solenzano de Cervantes. She passes away in January 1930, and Isabel Meadows from the Monterey people.
I want to point out that this is the Cervantes Velasquez conference room. It's named after Ascension.
From his interviews, we find that the Clareños were much intermarried with the Chocheños. The Chocheños are the people from Mission San Jose. The other folks are from Mission Santa Clara. The dialects were similar. 1929. We see the word muecma, but it's not the first time it's known. Well, we see it meaning la gente. So when we give presentations, people say muecma, muecma. We never heard of this fake tribe called muecma. That's what they called themselves. So in 1928, because of the threatened lawsuits, Congress passes the act to prevent the California Indians from suing, and they create the California Indian Jurisdictional Act and provided several provisions. One, it provided and gave permission for the State Attorney General, Webb, to sue the United States government over the 8.5 million acres of land. Two, you had to prove that your ancestors resided in the state as of 1852. Three, if your child was born after May 18, 1928, they were no longer allowed to legally be considered Indian under the jurisdiction. This is like a form of ethnic cleansing. So some of the Muecmans were full-bloods and half-bloods. Mission San Jose, Alameda County. They're the only tribe that used Mission San Jose and Alameda County. The Amuhs used Mission San Juan Batista and San Benito County. People down there used Carmel Mission. Again, some of the full-bloods. Tribe belongs to the Mission, Indian tribe, Mission San Jose. Francesca Guzman and her kids. Husband was Mission San Jose. Here's some of the families. This is Sheila Guzman. She's on the council today and on the language committee. Martin Guzman was one of the children. Francesca died in 1942. Her race is red. Catherine Marine, Catherine Peralta. Again, this is one of Mandy's ancestors. She was married to Lucas Marine. He was half-blood. She also was married to his older brother. And some of the Marines, this is Joe. He's not really of the Uncle Joe. He's not a Marine in the real sense. But Marvin, your dad, and Lawrence are descendants there. But they also are traditional dancers. This is Frank LaPena. And then Lucas Marine. The interesting thing here is that several of them use the term Elonese. This is the only of the three tribes that historically used the term Elonese. Said, my mother is Avelina Marine, and he says, my mother's parents belong to Mission San Jose. This is 1930. This is 50 years before I meet Rosemary, and saying that the documents are at Mission San Jose. His mother was Avelina, baptized 1864. Another family. So these are the documents we try to submit. But the Bureau says, you can't use it. This guy, who's an elder, is very interesting. Jose Bonoco. Look at what Fred Baker writes. The applicant is a full-blooded Indian. He's one of the last surviving members of the Mission San Jose Indian Band. It's an entity. And the Bureau rejected this as evidence by saying, we don't know what he meant by band. It's too ambiguous. You can't use it. And they also argue that this is self-identification. Although, Baker was not a Muwekma, or actually a California Indian. He was a judge. And so she uses Olanian over here. This is Rosemary's mother and uncles and aunts. That's Rosemary's mother and Rosemary, who I met in 1980. Albert Ariano, he was the baby, Dolores Marine. And the kids served in World War II. He's in the tank division. He was in the 101st Airborne Division. He was born in 1922. He was born in a federally recognized tribe. We went to Washington, D.C. in 2006. We talked to a non-Indian acting assistant secretary. Kaysen was his name. I think Jim Kaysen. Hank says, I served in the 101 Airborne Division. I landed at Utah Beach. I was born into a federally recognized tribe. I come back from the war. All my relatives are told we are no longer an Indian tribe. We are no longer recognized as Indians. Can you explain that? And of course, being a good Republican, he says, sure, we'll look into it. And in many cases, Democrats are not that much better. So then his mother writes a letter in 1936 asking about the Indian deal. They were suffering. They had no houses. The Depression was on. Says she wrote, my great-grandfather was chief of the tribe at Pleasanton. 4 years later, she gets a letter. 4 years later, 1940, from Nash, superintendent. She says, Mrs. Galvan is shown on the roll of 1/2 Indian blood, but does not have ward status, therefore is not eligible for any aid. And then one of the kids, your granddad, is too dark to go to school in the East Bay. So as a kid, they ship him off to Indian boarding school. So what do you need to be to go to Indian boarding school? You need to be Indian. The Bureau says you can't use this as evidence. 1931 and 1939. When he graduates, his grandmother was Pansy Potts. She was, I guess, pregnant in 1940 with Lawrence. But he enlists in the Marine Corps. Treasure Island. That's him up there, handsome dude. He is in every single major battle, from Guadalcanal all the way to the Ricuyus. And no historian will write about these men, and later on women, who served overseas because they're from a landless tribe, an unrecognized tribe. And many of your families also served with honor and dignity. He was, he was in the 108. He was in the 82nd Airborne Division in the 508th Paratroop Division. So, some of the other kids in the 40s go to Indian boarding school up at Chamawa. Cowlitz used as their evidence for federal recognition kids attending Indian boarding schools. These were federal actions. Muwekma tried to use the same precedent, and the Bureau says no. We're still using it now that Hillary Tompkins, who's Navajo senior solicitor of Interior, basically said that Collier never defined federal recognition. What we have is evidence of any federal action, such as children going to Indian boarding schools. The Bureau is still fighting tooth and nail. And then affidavits. This is Latrina Marine. They enroll in the Bay Area Indian Council in 47. The second BIA enrollment for the heads of households. $150 were issued for the value of 8.5 million acres of land. And Kelley was right. They deducted every dollar spent to kill Indians. Every bullet spent. So the 8.5 million acres of land that you see there in black. Kroeber changed his mind. He sided with the California Indians during the Klein case in '54. He says the survivors are there. They may even be full-bloods racially or biologically. The stock is not extinct, but they can no longer provide the anthropologist acquired knowledge about the group that he would like to preserve. What, pickle? Anyway. But they submitted in a formal docket to the federal courts. And they used Mission San Jose and the other missions as well for survivorship to 1955. the Bureau said, you cannot use this, even though it was accepted by the Secretary of Interior and the federal courts in the claims case. Then here, this is what the enrollments looked like for the 1950s. The tribe started to save its cemetery. It was joined by the American Indian Historical Society in San Francisco, Rupert Costo and Jeanette Henry. And all of a sudden, the tribe starts showing up in various publications and letters. Don Edwards advocated in 1966 to try to protect the Ohlone cemetery. It was being sold off, 4,000 Indians buried there. So they show up in the newspapers, stories written by tribal members, and this is the third BIA applications for heads of households, and they use Ohlone. They're also only tribe to use Ohlone Indian tribe. One guy, Ernest Thompson, was a guard at Alcatraz, and you know national parks don't want to hear that. And his son, who served in Vietnam era, he's a tribal councilman. Margaret Sanchez, Ohlone Indian, she just passed away. She's Rosemary's aunt, and that's her son, and Monica Ariano. And then in 1972, there was a settlement for 64,425,000 acres of land. 64,425,000 acres of land, and the payments was for $668.51. There's a check that was never cashed. One of the relations of Paul and other family members here, Tony Corona, would also carry around proudly show his check. They didn't cash him. They told, here's the money. You own 64,425,000 acres of land, because you're Indian, you can't have land. What we're going to do is make you rich. 1972, take this money and build your futures with it. Right? And so the tribe incorporated. They created the Ohlone Indian Tribe Incorporated in the handbook. They show up there. Malcolm Margolin's book, The Ohlone Way, is absolutely useless. That's all he says. Never talk to the living people. Rosemary now shows up with the Ohlone Tribal Council. That's her and a mom. And then Stanford returns 550 burials. This guy says, I'd be willing to bet. PhD anthropologist from Berkeley. When we went up there to show him the documents, we didn't have to look at it, academic freedom. Rosemary's mother said it was academic fraud. And this is the reburial, 550 burials, Coyote Hills. And then Rosemary gets a letter, the tribe says in their letter of petition, and they talk about because of the significance and the word permanence of acknowledgement as a tribe. Once you're federally recognized, you're permanently recognized, and only Congress can terminate that status. Establishes a perpetual government-government relationship with the United States. This is the response to the letter to petition. So anyway, Rosemary's invited goes to the White House with other representatives from the unacknowledged tribes at the Clinton White House. In 1996, they get the Pleasanton or Verona Band of Allen. It was previously acknowledged between 1914 and 27. The band was among the groups identified as bands under the jurisdiction of the Indian Agency at Sacramento. The agency dealt with the Verona Band as a group and identified it as a distinct social and political entity. The band was among the bands proposed by a special California Indian agent in 1914 for home site land under the Appropriations Homeless Act, which began in 1906. The interesting thing here is that after Muwekma asked if we have previous unambiguous federal recognition, how were we legally terminated, Lee Fleming and Neil McCaleb said, we are going to help Indians. We're going to revise the regulations. We will no longer deal with previous recognition. We will put it at the very end of the process, after you've met all the criteria the way we want you to meet. So every tribe that has requested previous recognition has been slammed by Lee Fleming. Legislation out of the ACCIP, California Tribal Status Clarification Act. The Muwekmas were listed. The Southern Sierra Miwok Nation of Yosemite were listed. And it never went out of committee. State of California, March Fong Yu recognized the 3 tribes in obtaining recognition. Muwekma, Amuh, Association of the United States Army for Amuh, Mutsun, and the Esalen and Muwekma. Even Condoleezza Rice, I hate to say it before she was a criminal, she wrote a letter of support. And then even the Bureau of Indian Affairs. This is Michael Smith, Acting Area Director. Like the wording on this one. The Bureau of Indian Affairs Sacramento is ready to assist Sonungwe Council and Muwekma Ohlone Tribe in seeking administrative federal recognition on the basis your tribes were never terminated. I am not making this up. I'm just highlighting it in yellow. And then more recently, publications like Dolan Ergel's book starts acknowledging the existence of the Muwekma and other tribes. Then they sued in order to expedite under APA, Administrative Procedures Act. The judge said 24 years is too long, 2 years is too long. So they made a formal determination, which was never disputed by the Bureau, that the Muwekma tribe is a tribe of Ohlone Indians, indigenous present in the San Francisco Bay Area in the early part of the 20th century. The Department of the Interior recognized the Muwekma tribe as an Indian tribe under the jurisdiction of the United States. Even when the Bureau declined to restore the tribe, they referred to the Muwekmas as a historic tribe in the final determination. So the Bureau did not even dispute this. Amuh has the same, almost identical, documentation as Muwekma. And so do other previously recognized tribes in California. Cruz Bustamante wrote a letter, says, demonstrated as a trust relationship with the United States in 1906 to the present. Congress has never terminated. He was the lieutenant governor. And some of the people through the 1940s, the 50s, they carried on their lives. Their meetings, their gatherings, Christmas time, their camping. And no assistant secretary, no decision maker looked at any of these evidence until right before Larry Echo Hawk left office in, I think we were there in November of 2011. So these are just the faces of the next generation. They're multiplying. Stanford renamed the building in 1986 Muwekma Taro. It means House of the People. We do their own CRM. Everything I write about is owned by the tribe, intellectual property. And now they are even proposing to make the language of Northern California called Muwekma. This is Randy Milliken, and now this was before the courts. And the judge, Judge Walton, slammed Interior in this lawsuit. He said, show me in the administrative record where you treated Muwekma and inform them, clear and cogent evidence that you treated Muwekma the same as Lower Lake and Ione. And they failed, so we thought we won the lawsuit. Someone went down to the court and said that the Muwekma tribe had settled. They took the tribe off the docket for 1.5 years as the tribe was waiting for 3 years for a response. And then some new clerk, probably some ultra-conservative clerk, rewrote everything, completely ignoring everything the judge had originally opinioned, reversing it 360 degrees. No, I'm sorry, 180 degrees. That's a full circle. 180 degrees. Anyway, so then the tribe went to the Federal Appeals Court. When we were just there in September, 2 of the judges, that's all you need, out of the 3, slammed Interior for the history of screw-ups of the Bureau of Indian Affairs with tribes. So we now think, and they made some possibility of negotiations with Kevin Washburn, that they could kind of control things a little better if they settled with the tribe and say we have an administrative error. Tejon, down in Bakersfield, was restored January 2011, just before Echo Hawk left. Okay? They used, or Linda Locklear used the Muwekma lawsuit, this one, to argue that the assistant secretary has full authority to waive the regulations and restore the tribe. Scott Keeph argued that he did not have to accept as precedence, when he was solicitor, the restoration of Ione, the 2 Alaskan tribes, and Lower Lake. He was in charge. He controlled the gateway. He controlled everything. Since 1973, he's been there. Okay? So they used the fact that in this lawsuit, even though Muwekma lost it, was the fact that the assistant secretary has full authority to waive the regulations to benefit the tribes. And they did so. They tested it. And no one challenged it with the Tejon ruling. It means that there is a great deal of hope for previous California recognized tribes, especially Muwekma wins. Anyway, that's all I got to do. Fine. Okay, so if there are any questions, sorry for being long-winded, but I try to take you through a process that we've gone through, and there is a glimmer of hope. So any questions? I hope I answered some questions while talking about that. Right. Well, anyway, so thank you, and we want you guys to be able to emulate this. We want you to be able to emulate kind of the model that we use, especially if the tribe gets a positive determination either from Interior or the courts at the end of this year. Sir?
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan. And just to be clear, where you're at now, you're basically, you appealed a decision, and then you went in and they provided testimony, and you're awaiting the decision from the appellate court.
Yes, the appeals, that's correct, in Washington, D.C. And all, like I said, it's a 3-panel judge. 2 of the judges look like they will favor the tribe, and that's all you need to reverse everything. And they would remand that the tribe be restored, placed back on the list of federally recognized tribes, because federal courts do have that authority.
And you said you're expecting that by the end of the year, you're hoping.
Yeah, we're expecting it because the clerks have to go through all the case law, write up the positions and everything, but in the meantime, there is kind of hints of discussions behind the scenes with the Obama administration to move to restore the tribe or reaffirm the tribe as a federally recognized tribe. They may do it before there is an outcome. Of course, everyone's waiting and holding their breath with the elections. Right. Don't look for any bright days in the future if Romney's elected. That's all I can say, and I'm not a Democrat. I'm a vegetarian. Any other questions? So anyway, that's a case history that you could see kind of up front.
Did they even take into consideration these on the 72 payout to individuals?
No.
As proof?
No.
Then why would they give them a check?
Right.
From the BIA?
And we also argued, and the fact that it was accepted by the federal courts and the Secretary of the Interior, their argument is that, they went back to the argument that there is no entity called California Indians, even though that was settled. That there could be an entity that would be named in the legislation and the process. But they argued that the BIA represents self-identification. We do have a letter that from Holly Record, George Roth, and Dibron, via Dina Magdaleno and the ACCIP, that the Muwekma or any other tribe could use the 1928 census in conjunction with other documents to prove that for their continuous existence and for identification. The Cherokees in 1909, not the Cherokee, yeah, Cherokees had a claim settlement in 1909 that looked exactly like these BIA applications. It's called the Guyan Roll. The Porch Creeks from Alabama claimed, filled out claims enrollment documents and were rejected. But even though they were rejected, they were still viewed as valid evidence. So the Bureau has no standards. The Bureau, the Bureau, and not only that, there's internecine warfare. The warfare was, if I can lift this up a second, I know. Okay. Oh, duh. Well, I never said I was smart. Yeah. Okay. So, these guys, these permanent staff, argue that they should have the sole authority to make decisions, and the decision maker should just rubber stamp whatever they say. Under the Bush administration, that's what happens. You remember Dave Anderson, I think his name was? He was famous, I think it was in Michigan. He was famous for flipping hamburgers. That was his expertise as the assistant secretary under the Bush administration. So there was internecine warfare going on when Kevin Gover was assistant secretary. His staff independently reviewed on their own merits petitions and documents where it was rejected here, it was accepted here. And that's why they pushed for the reaffirmation of Lower Lake, Shunak, and I forget, a king salmon, I think it was called, from Alaska. But these guys are supposedly not allowed to make decisions, and as we found out, they're not even allowed to look at the evidence. That's what Scott Keeph basically prevented. And then recently under the Obama administration, they did move him out. They got rid of Edith Blackwell, who was another loon, and then she was a solicitor. And then they also got rid of Barbara Cones. They moved her out. But Scott Keeph and Barbara were there at the hearings in September for the Muwekma case. So even though they moved out, we still don't know that they weaseled their way in back into positions of authority. So it's ugly, but it doesn't have to be permanently ugly. Not like me, permanently ugly. Okay, anything?